Good afternoon. It's really amazing how quickly a virtual room fills up. I want to welcome all of you to this virtual book launch, America and the Art of Flanders, Collecting Paintings by Rubens, Van Dyck, and Their Circles. I'm Ian Wardropper, the Anna Marie and Stephen Kellen Director of the Frick Collection. And we are celebrating this book, which I hold up just as tangible proof that it has just appeared, beautifully produced and written. I want to particularly thank the Robert H. Smith Family Foundation and the General Delegation of the Government of Flanders to the United States of America for supporting this volume. I want to congratulate Esme Quadbach, who is the editor of this, the fifth in a series of studies in the history of art collecting in America that has been produced by the Center for the History of Collecting in America at the Frick Collection, particularly at the Frick Art Reference Library. I also want to congratulate all the authors, several of whom are participating in today's panel discussions, and single out Arthur Wheelock, who wrote the introduction to this and has lectured frequently at the Frick over the years and supported the Center for the History of Collecting. Arthur will be in conversation with Thomas Lyson, and this gives me the opportunity to thank him for having invited my wife and I to his beautifully restored townhouse in Antwerp and to see his wonderful old master collection. He will be in conversation with Arthur Wheelock at the end of this program. Finally, I'm particularly glad to have the opportunity to thank the Delegation of Flanders to the United States of America. It has been so supportive of exhibitions, symposia, books at the Frick Collection, particularly over the last several years. In 2016, they were an important sponsor of our exhibition, Van Dyck, The Anatomy of Portraiture, which took place that year. And then in 2018, they helped to sponsor the Charterhouse of Bruges, Jan van Eyck, Petrus Christus, and Jan Vos. One of my great disappointments of this year was that I was scheduled to see the Van Eyck exhibition in Ghent in March and had to cancel that because of the onset of the pandemic. But look forward to such time when we can see exhibitions and have symposia such as this and see each other in person in the future. Finally, of course, as I said earlier, the Delegation of Flanders has been a sponsor of this very book that we are launching today. And it's my pleasure now to introduce the General Delegate of Flanders to the United States, Yves Wontens. Yves.
Good morning, Director Wardropper. Thank you very much for this introduction and your kind words. The book, as you mentioned earlier on, America and the Art of Flanders, not only looks, but also is very impressive. And also on our behalf, I would like to thank all the people who participated in this project. I can't express it in a better way than to quote the following. This book, the fifth in a series of publications on collecting in America, explores the roles that individuals had in forming private and public collections, and how and why individuals and museums in the US embraced Flemish masters with such enthusiasm. As Flanders diplomatic representative to the US, I'm proud that we can host this event together with the Frick Collection, showing our extraordinary cultural heritage. And as the director mentioned, collaboration between us and the Frick Collection is a long one and an ongoing one that we're very proud of. I'm looking forward to the presentations and the following panel discussion, some with participants that I've come to know during my stay in the US. In particular, I would like to welcome my fellow countrymen and fellow Antwerpmen, I must say, Mr. Thomas Lyson, who will be part on the conversation. So I wish you good luck in the discussion and a conversation. And on our behalf, from the Flemish government side, I thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Louisa Wood Ruby, and I am head of research at the Frick Art Reference Library. Thank you, Ian, for the support you have given this project and for the support you've given to the Center of the History of Collecting over all the years. And thank you, Yves, for the support of the government of Flanders that helped make this publication a reality. Today's program will begin with an overview of the origins of the book, which date back to the symposium of the same name, organized in 2016 by our first speaker, Esme Quadbach. Please note, in the interest of time, I will not be giving extensive bios for today's speakers. And if you'd like to find out more, please refer to the beautiful publication. As an attendee today, you can purchase the book at a 30% discount with the link you see in the chat box. If it's not there now, it will be it's there now. A specialist in 17th century Dutch and Flemish painting, as well as the history of Old Master collecting, Esme Quadbach was the assistant director and editor-in-chief for the Center of the History of Collecting at the Frick Collection and Art Reference Library until mid-2020. I think it's safe to say that the high quality of the current publication is largely due to Esme's extensive knowledge of the field of Flemish art, along with her expert editing skills. Esme was aided in the production of this wonderful volume by Samantha Deutsch, Assistant Director for the Center of the History of Collecting, and one of our panelists today, Dr. Margaret Laster, currently serving as a consultant to the center. A bit of housekeeping. During the talks, if you have a question for one of the speakers, please put it not in the chat box, but in the Q&A on the lower right of your screen. Just open that up, and the questions will be answered at the end of the event. Now, Esme's talk has actually been pre-recorded because due to high winds on the East Coast in the past week or so, she was a bit worried about her internet connection. So we will now have a video of Esme's lecture for today.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Esme Quadbach, and I am the editor of the book that we are celebrating today, America and the Art of Flanders. It is the 5th volume in the series Studies in the History of Art Collecting in America, co-published by the Frick Collection and Penn State University Press. And I would like to thank Eleanor Goodman and everyone else at Penn State Press. It has been a great pleasure to work with them on this book and also on the 4 earlier volumes in this series. And of course, I also want to thank Inge Riestier, Director Emerita of the Center for the History of Collecting, who is the founding editor of this book series. And I also want to thank Samantha Deutsch. In this volume, 12 authors, all of whom are art historians and many of whom are museum curators, examine the American collecting history and the American taste over the past centuries for the art of Peter Paul Rubens, Anthony van Dyck, and their Flemish contemporaries. And here is our poster girl in full. It's Rubens's Marchesa Spinola Doria at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Of course, our original plan many months ago was to have this book launch in person at Flanders House, which is located high up on the 44th floor of the New York Times building in the heart of Manhattan, where we would have been able to enjoy these magnificent views over downtown Manhattan. However, that celebration was not to be, and hopefully we'll find another reason to celebrate at Flanders House in person in the foreseeable future. But of course, there always is a silver lining. And in this case, one very good thing is that we are now able to celebrate this publication with so many more people on both sides of the Atlantic. And I would like to welcome our viewers in Flanders, especially. And also, I want to thank Yves Wantens and Flanders House for their support of the book. And in addition, I want to acknowledge the Robert H. Smith Family Foundation for their support. As the editor of this publication, I have been asked to give you a short introduction into our topic, as well as an introduction to several of the book's authors who will be joining us here later when we will have a panel moderated by Betsy Wiesman of the National Gallery of Art, who will be joined by Adam Aker of the Metropolitan Museum, Anne Willett of the Getty, and Margaret Laster, an independent scholar in New York. The panel will be followed by an interview conducted by Arthur Wheelock, who recently retired from the National Gallery of Art. And Arthur wrote the wonderful introductory essay to our book. And today he will interview Thomas Wijssen, who is not an American, but a Fleming, or actually an Antwerpenaar. And Thomas is the lucky owner of what is probably the most distinguished collection of 17th century Flemish paintings in private hands today, not in America, but in Flanders. I do briefly want to mention here the other authors who have contributed to our book. You have already seen Louisa Wood Ruby, but several others won't be joining us today here in person, so to say. Their names will probably be familiar to many of you. They are Lance Humphreys, Ronnie Baer, Dennis Weller, George Keyes, and Alexandra Libby. And I know that all or most of them are in our virtual audience today, and I do want to thank them all here for their excellent essays, in which they present a lot of new and very interesting research. And you see here the table of contents of the book. Little is known about the earliest history of Old Master paintings in America. But surviving sale catalogs and advertisements indicate that Old Masters, including Flemish paintings, were already available here by the late 18th century. For example, in June of 1786, that is 10 years after the Declaration of Independence was adopted, a quote-unquote capital and well-chosen collection of Old Masters was auctioned off by one Weiner Van Zandt at a place called Chorus Tavern in Manhattan. Among the Flemish paintings that Van Zandt offered were works by, or presumed to be by, Rubens, Van Dyck, a member of the Teniers family, here called Tenier, and one of the Bruegels, or Bruegels, who's called von Bruegel here. Unfortunately, not one of these works has been identified. It is not known where they came from, who purchased them, or what happened to them after they were auctioned off. Since then, many thousands of paintings, many thousands of Old Masters, including numerous 17th century Flemish paintings, have arrived on America's shores. And one early arrival was this splendid work by Jan Bruegel the Elder, which arrived here in 1794 from Antwerp as part of a shipment of more than 60 paintings owned by two direct Rubens descendants who had fled Antwerp to escape the invasion of the French Revolutionary Army. The banker Henri-Joseph Darcelaer, Baron Stier, and his wife Marie-Louise Peters. Once in America, Baron Stier and his wife kept their paintings mostly in crates. The Steers lived in various places until they built a mansion, Riversdale, which survives to this day near College Park in Maryland, and where they stayed until 1803, when they felt it was safe to return to Antwerp. At the time, the couple left their paintings in the care of their youngest daughter, Rosalie, who would remain in the United States. Later, Rosalie returned the Bruegel and many of the other paintings to her parents in Antwerp. Not long after her father died in 1821, most of the paintings were sold. The Bruegel then passed through several private collections in Europe. Nevertheless, in 1977, more than a century and a half later, it returned to the United States when it was bought by a private collector, the real estate developer Robert Smith. And another 15 years later, in 1992, it was acquired by the Getty, where it remains to this day. Now, this Bruegel is not the only Stier painting now in America. This work, Romulus and Remus, long thought to be by Rubens, made the same transatlantic journey, but it would be kept by the Stier family, and it is still owned by the family's American descendants today. The story of the Stiers and their paintings is just one of many stories that you can read about in further detail in the book. Our book opens with an overview by Arthur Wheelock, who sets the stage historically and culturally and explores the reasons why Americans chose to collect the art of 17th century Flanders. What were their actions, motives, and tastes? Arthur arrived at the National Gallery of Art in 1973 as a Finley Fellow, and subsequently he served there as a curator from 1975 until 2018. And I should note here that Arthur himself has also had a very direct and very impressive impact on the history of Flemish art in America. During his tenure, he added significantly to the gallery's Flemish holdings. The number of 17th century Flemish paintings grew from 36 to 65. And I'm showing you just a few examples here. This is Rubens's Fall of Phaeton on the left, and Adrian Brouwers's Youth Making a Face on the right. There's a few more. There's Michael Sviertz's Anthony de Bordes and his Valet on the left, and Clara Peters's Still Life with Flowers on the right. Lovely small flower still life on copper. And just to be complete, I've squeezed in the very last Flemish painting that was acquired by the gallery very recently, this Still Life by Van Snijders. Now, my time today is limited, and I won't be able to discuss or even mention all the essays in the book, but I do want to draw your attention to Margaret Laster's investigation into the taste for Flemish painting in early 19th century New York. Margaret, who will be one of our panelists, is an independent scholar and a former curator at the New York Historical Society. She is an Americanist, and she has a particular interest in the collecting history of Old New York. And her essay focuses on two pioneering collectors, Luman Reed and Thomas Jefferson Bryan, who came from very different backgrounds and led very different lives. Reed, seen here on the left, was a self-made man who became a successful dry goods merchant. He started collecting paintings in about 1830, just 6 years before his death. His collection initially became the nucleus of New York City's first permanent art gallery, the New York Gallery of the Fine Arts. And after that closed, Reed's paintings were placed at the New York Historical Society. Thomas Jefferson Bryan, by contrast, was born in Philadelphia to great wealth and built his collection when he lived in Paris during the 1830s and 1840s. He returned to America, and in 1853, he opened his Bryan Gallery of Christian Art, also in New York. Some years later, Bryan's paintings also entered the New York Historical Society, and Margaret demonstrates how Reid and Bryan, for different reasons and in different ways, both bought Flemish paintings for their collections. Not that they were always successful, but one has to admire their efforts. Another essay that I want to bring your attention to is that of Adam Aker, curator at the Metropolitan Museum, who will also be one of our panelists. And Adam is a Van Dyck specialist, and he surveys the American taste for that artist. And Van Dyck, as you may know, was long the most sought after master of the Flemish school here in America. As Adam points out in his essay, though, it is important to remember that Americans did not primarily think of Van Dyck in terms of Flanders or Flemishness. Rather, Van Dyck was often seen and collected as the head of the British school of painting, a status that had long been claimed for him by British painters themselves. The Met, of course, has a splendid collection of Van Dycks, and here you see its very last Van Dyck acquisition, Queen Henrietta Maria, one of many works that came to the Met last year through the bequest of its longtime donor, Jane Weitzman. And speaking of the Met, the very last Flemish acquisition to enter its collections is this lovely flower piece by, again, Clara Peters. And Adam told me that it was purchased just before the pandemic hit. Our third panelist today is Anne Wollett, curator at the Getty and a Rubens specialist. In her essay in our book, Anne charts collecting Flemish paintings, most notably Rubens, in Southern California. And as Anne shows, substantial collections of 17th century Flemish paintings can be found at such institutions as the J. Paul Getty Museum and the Norton Simon Museum of Art. Collectors in California mostly entered the collecting scene later than their counterparts on the East Coast. Still, business tycoons such as J. Paul Getty and Norton Simon rank among the leading 20th century collectors of Flemish painting, and moreover, they shared a taste for Rubens. And I will add here that Anne is currently preparing a Rubens exhibition, which will be of interest to many of you. It is titled Rubens Picturing Antiquity, and it will open in November 2021 at the Getty Villa amidst the Getty's collection of ancient Greek and Roman works. The show will explore Rubens's deep knowledge of ancient art and culture and its impact on his art. And here you see one of the key works in the exhibition, Rubens's Caledonian War Hunt, now at the Getty. Finally, the moderator of our panel is Betsy Wiesman, who in 2017 left her curatorial post at London's National Gallery and was at the Cleveland Museum of Art until she came to the National Gallery of Art late last year. Betsy has written extensively on Flemish art and especially on Rubens. And in her essay in our book, she examines the American collecting history of Rubens in the late 19th and 20th centuries. Rubens's reputation initially often had little positive resonance in America, which is hardly surprising given that his art was thought to represent so much of what America's Puritan settlers and colonial founders had rejected when they left Europe. Also, as Betsy notes, the handful of so-called Rubens paintings that arrived in America early on barely did Rubens justice. And of course, the fact that Rubens had a large workshop as well as many followers made the attribution of his paintings even more complicated. One work that came to America under Rubens's name was this Return of the Holy Family from Jerusalem. It was acquired by the Metropolitan Museum in 1871 as part of its founding purchase. And as you can tell from my caption here, it is no longer at the Met. It was deaccessioned and auctioned off in 1981. It was then bought by a private collector for just $7,000. However, in 2012, the Church of St. Charles Borromeo in Antwerp, for which it had originally been painted, was able to acquire it. And in 2017, after it was restored, it was installed in its original location in the church above the St. Joseph altar. And I should say this is a pre-restoration image. It's now attributed to Rubens and his workshop. So this is one painting that returned home, so to say. Lots of food for thought, I think. And in conclusion, I would like to say that I very much hope that our book not only serves as a worthwhile contribution to the history of collecting Flemish art in America and to the history of collecting in general, but especially that it will help inspire further research. I very much hope you will have a chance to enjoy the book, and I very much hope you will enjoy the rest of this event. Thank you.